Welcome to this deep dive session where we question what others only whisper. Today we're exploring a theory that's downright explosive. What if Josephus, not Paul, was really behind the Pauline epistles?
Wow, that's a bold claim, right? So we're talking like an alternative origin story for some of Christianity's core texts?
Exactly, yeah. The idea is that the famous first century Jewish historian Josephus might have actually ghost-written the core theology we all assume Paul created, playing a hidden role in shaping early Christianity.
Yep. All right, so let's break that down. What are the main points that lead some to think Josephus and Paul were connected?
Well, first off, consider their background. See, Paul, originally known as Saul of Tarsus, is said to have converted around 35 CE and authored his epistles between 48 and 64 CE, while Josephus was born around 37 CE and later wrote texts like the Jewish War and Antiquities of the Jews.
Interesting timeline. So even though their lives overlap a bit, isn't there a slight chronological challenge here?
Sure, but here's where it gets intriguing. Both men were Pharisees. Both had strong Roman connections. Paul held Roman citizenship, and Josephus, after defecting, got Roman citizenship and even adopted the name Flavius.
So they shared not just a religious background, but also an affinity for Roman ideology?
Precisely. And that shapes the narrative because both wrote in Greek with a certain rhetorical flair. It's like they both used an elite, almost polished vocabulary, which wasn't typical for someone with a rough background.
Yeah, I see. So the similarities in writing style already hint at a possible common influence or even authorship crossover?
Exactly. And on top of that, Paul's writings, such as his call for submitting to authority in Romans 13, are oddly very Roman-friendly, almost as if they were crafted with an agenda in mind to pacify rebellious sentiments.
Wait, so you're saying Paul's message is more aligned with a Roman propaganda vibe than a strictly Jewish revolutionary spirit?
Right. Yeah, that's one interpretation. And consider this. Mainstream scholars already agree that at least 6 of the 13 Pauline epistles are pseudepigraphical, meaning they were written after Paul's death. So if forgery is on the table, then why not the idea that someone like Josephus, with his rhetorical skills and Roman inclinations, could have written or heavily influenced the texts?
That's a real eyebrow raiser. It challenges the conventional view that these texts emerged purely from Paul's own experiences and revelations.
Absolutely. And then there are modern advocates of the theory, like Joseph Atwill, author of Caesar's Messiah, who argues that Christianity was in fact invented by the Flavian emperors. He sees these epistles as part of a strategic propaganda campaign meant to calm down rebellious Jews.
That's fascinating and a bit conspiratorial. Does anyone else add fuel to this theory?
Yes, indeed. Robert Eisenman from CSU Long Beach has suggested that the figure of Paul might have been fabricated to counterbalance a more radical Jewish Christian movement led by James. And even Richard Carrier has touched on the idea, acknowledging suspicious parallels related to forged letters and pseudepigraphy in early Christian texts.
So there's a pretty extensive network of fringe scholars who see these overlaps as more than mere coincidence.
Yeah, and here's a key element. Both Paul and Josephus show a strikingly similar literary style and theological tone. They both reframe traditional Jewish ideas, shifting away from literal political messianism towards something more aligned with personal piety and, Roman peace.
Right. But here's what I find interesting. Paul's letters don't get referenced until the second half of the 2nd century. That's quite a time gap from when they were supposedly written.
Exactly, and that delay raises serious questions. It opens the possibility that these texts could have been backdated creations, a sort of literary scaffolding built by Roman agents during the right moment to legitimize a pro-Roman Christianity.
But couldn't that also reflect a cautious approach in early Christian communities about endorsing their texts? I mean, isn't it plausible that the delay reflects oral traditions preceding formal written accounts?
That's a fair point, but if you consider the context, Roman political pressures, and the need for a controlled narrative, it's also plausible that these texts were deliberately timed. It's like efficiency in messaging over decades.
That makes sense. So essentially, we're looking at a theory where Josephus might have been the unseen craftsman behind not just Paul's epistles, but also parts of the Acts of the Apostles, right?
Exactly, yeah. The theory even suggests that Josephus's work constructed a careful image of Paul, a Paul who's surprisingly docile under Roman oversight. The whole idea is that this wasn't a grassroots movement, but rather a top-down construction from within the Roman sphere.
That's, quite the picture. A sort of puppet master scenario where Josephus or his proxies shaped early Christian doctrine.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really interesting to think about. I mean, if you imagine it, it's like behind the scenes of a massive historical play where the true authors are hidden in plain sight.
Right. But then, don't you think it's a bit, overreaching to say that Josephus was the sole architect here? After all, the historical evidence is quite murky.
Fair enough. And I actually agree with that a bit. It's definitely a fringe theory, one that, while provocative, doesn't carry the full weight of mainstream scholarship. But it's the questions it raises that are really compelling. Why does Paul sound so Roman in his epistles? Why is there this notable silence about him in non-Christian historical sources?
And those are the kinds of questions that push us to re-examine accepted narratives. It's like, if everything we know is built on shaky foundations, shouldn't we take a closer look?
Exactly. The theory might not be conclusive, but it certainly invites us to ask questions that no pulpit might ever raise. It's a call to re-examine early historical texts, the interplay of propaganda, and the power of narrative formation.
Right. And what about the language and stylistic similarities between the two? That's another bone of contention, isn't it?
For sure. Both wrote in Greek with a high level of rhetorical skill. Paul's language, which often appears rough on the surface, actually shows bursts of elite vocabulary and sophisticated theological ideas, almost like it was refined by someone with a background in both Jewish tradition and Roman literary culture.
Yeah, indeed. It kind of makes you wonder if such a blend could have come solely from a tent-maker turned apostle, or if it hints at deeper involvement from someone like Josephus.
Precisely. The narrative of a humble apostle crafting such complex theology seems almost too neat when you consider the Roman-aligned themes that dominate his writings.
But let's play devil's advocate for a moment. Could it be that Paul, even as a Jew, was simply influenced by Roman culture through his personal experiences and interactions?
That's certainly possible, and it's a valid critique. I mean, the Roman world was pervasive, and anyone living under its rule would inevitably be influenced. However, the argument here is that the parallels are too numerous and too precise to be mere coincidence. It's like a puzzle where all the pieces fit a bit too perfectly.
Yeah, I get that. So, in the end, while the theory remains on the fringe, it, forces us to question the established timeline and authorship of early Christian texts.
Exactly, and whether or not you fully buy into the idea, it's an invitation to dig deeper, to ask new questions about the creation of Roman Christianity and the interplay between politics and prophecy.
Right on. This discussion really underscores that history is never as clear-cut as it seems. Sometimes the hidden narratives are the most fascinating and the most controversial.
Absolutely. And remember, everyone, it's all about questioning the established narratives and examining the evidence from every angle. Thanks for joining this exploration into one of history's more provocative theories.
Exactly.